So you have a business that is looking to set off and reach for the stars. You have a goal or have targets, but you do not know where to start or where to go. You want to transform your business, have a structure, or even have assistants. Then guys, look no further than Olive and Palm. Olive and Palm are a business consultancy firm that specialize in transforming your company into becoming the best it can be. With expertise in digital and agile transformations, they will bring cutting-edge strategies, innovative solutions, and first-person approach to make sure your vision comes to life or get to the next step. Olive and Palm have worked with names such as EasyJet, British Airways, Boots, American Express, Specsavers, Sports Direct, John Lewis, and so much more. So why pick Olive and Palm? Because not only do they have years of expertise and big names behind them, but they are passionate and they do care. They are determined to help you reach your goals. So if you want to get in contact with them, dial on their number at 075525 00041. Or you can even email them at molly@palm-olive.com. Again, their phone number is 075525 00041. And again, their email is molly@palm-olive.com. How's it going? My name is Reese Deans of Creative Space Podcast, and today's guest on the show is none other than Ron Bohmer. A veteran actor on the Broadway stage, he has performed in many musicals, including The Book of Mormon, Sunset Boulevard, and most recognizably, The Phantom in The Phantom of the Opera. He goes into so much depth, and this is what is really intriguing about this individual. This guy just goes into so much depth of what this character means, what is behind the mask, the facade of the Phantom, what is the mystique, what he goes through it so meticulously. It's really fascinating to hear him talk about the character, and I was just so drawn into it, and I hope you guys are the same when you listen or even watch this episode. But without further ado, let's get down to it. It's me and Ron Bohmer on Creative Space Podcast.
Oh, is it? Am I freezing up?
Nope, you're good now. Yeah,
good now.
Just a moment of freezing, but now you're fine.
Yeah, I'm using a very old computer. I am. I need to shove coal in it one day.
Just the one I'm using is kind of on the older side too, but it works fine for Zoom. It's not my main computer, but it's it can be a little glitchy, but not on Zoom. It does fine.
Yeah. It seems to do really well, especially this laptop as well. It does. It always seems to do well on Zoom, and every now and then it glitches up. I mean, the only time I had massive problems, it was with two guests. One was with Timothy Williams. It just shut off for some reason. It just completely went off, and I was like, "Oh my God, I've lost all content." And luckily, I managed to recover it. And the last one was, I can't remember the guest. But mine went off again, and luckily I had to get my old phone, and connect it to my microphone, and basically all the audio was recovered and the visuals were recovered, so it was not all doom and gloom.
Well, I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah.
Well,
but
welcome
how
to
do you
the
pronounce
mess
your
of
last
my
name?
office.
Live in the office.
Yeah, thank you. It's a bit of a chaos right now, but it's not the best camera-ready environment, but it will make do.
No problem. How do you pronounce your last name then?
Bohmer. It rhymes with
Bohmer,
Homer.
right? Because
Yes.
my grandfather looked at it, he was like, Bomber? And I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm glad you checked. Thank you. Yeah, like Homer in the Iliad.
Yeah. I love speaking with people who have done Broadway, done musicals, done theater. This is the whole reason why I've done this podcast, is because a few years ago, I think it was back in 2021, I was working with a production company. I won't say who they are, but it was only a 6-month contract. It was like in the UK, especially in Wales, the government were a bit like, right, we want to encourage people to work where they want to work, what's their best dream jobs or whatever. And the way
Hmm.
to do that is to develop their experience. And that was a Kickstart scheme between the ages of 16 or 17 to 25. So I
Uh-huh.
just managed to get in there. It was going back a few years ago. And
Yeah.
but it wasn't for me. It wasn't the best experience. And where they were based in Cardiff, just around the corner was the main theatre, the main Wales Millennium Centre. And every time I looked at it, I was like, I miss theatre so badly. I really miss
Mm.
it. And I thought, well, theatre's not going to come back just yet at that time
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
of COVID. I was like, oh,
Right.
how do I fall in love with the arts again, whether it just be theatre, film, etc. And that's the whole point of the podcast that come around. And
Wow.
what was really intriguing though is that when you mentioned Robert Cuscioli, he was one of my first guests on the show.
Oh,
He was such a sweetheart, such a
yeah.
sweetheart. Fair play
He
to
really
him.
is.
Well,
He's just
how
the
far back do
kindest
you
guy.
go with him then?
1994 was when we did Les Mis together. So he talks in his podcast interview with you, which I listened to. It was a lovely interview.
Thank you.
And when he was doing Les Mis, and around the time that Jekyll and Hyde was starting to happen for him, that was when we first met. Um, and we were both kind of new to the Broadway community. I think he had done um, The World Goes Round, I believe he did, which was a Candor and Ebb review um, that had kind of got him started, and that was an off-Broadway show and kind of launched him. But then, as he said in the interview, Richard J. Alexander, who is the producing director of Les Mis at that time in America, he became interested in him for doing Javert, and I came in, I think, really shortly after he started as Enjolras in Les Miserables. So we can certainly talk about that more in the interview. But Bob was immediately, it was this crazy thing because he was Javert, and if you've ever met Bob, he's a giant. He's just a big, commanding guy, and he's this big force of a dude. But then he was so kind and gentle, and like I was moving into a house at the time, and he offered to come over and help me do some work around the house and stuff like that. He was just the sweetest guy, and I'll never forget. He had a gold Camaro that was from the 70s, I think. It was like a classic car. It was just the coolest car. Like he looked like a TV star coming driving up to my house in this car. It was like Starsky and Hutch or something. I don't know if you know that in Wales, but it was an old TV show from the 70s. And here comes Bob, like, oh, I'm here to help you paint your house. So, he's great. I really, really dig him a lot. And he's just a crazy talented actor.
Mm. Well, it was interesting because when I first started off the podcast, I was trying to think of guests that would, because obviously when you started off a podcast, and I'm not like Joe Rogan, or I'm not like Mark Maron, who they got names behind them and they can get the guest in so quickly.
Hmm.
Um, I was like, oh, I'd love to have names that I know and who would love to come on, and I was sat in my room, and I'm looking through my old like YouTube videos that I watched, yeah, and then Robert came on singing Jekyll and Hyde, This Is the
Yeah.
Moment, and I was like, I want him. I want him. I want to talk about that. And fair play, he when he came on, we had a lovely conversation. It was so funny because obviously I don't know if he still lives in New York now. I don't know
Oh,
if he's
no.
still but he said to me at the very beginning, oh, I do apologize if you ever hear drilling and now I'm still living in New York. And I was like, oh, is it still hustling, bustling? He was like, yep, not a problem. But it never affected the interview. That was I thought, because obviously when I'm starting out, it's more like, oh my God, am I going to lose the audio for the sake of New York being New York, going "Durr," like that? And I
Yes,
never did, never ever
that's
did.
lucky.
But
Well, we shouldn't have any interruptions here unless you might hear my dog barking at some point. So,
oh, it's all good. I'm used to. I mean, who was the last time? I think it was Lena Hall. She had a dog just in the background barking, and she was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I was like, "No, no, no, no! I want to see the dog. What have you got?" And I think she had a Labrador. I think she had a
oh
Labrador,
wow.
and oh my God, it was just so beautiful. But I love dogs. I mean, every time I've done podcasts, and I see a dog, if I'm doing Zoom or whatever, I'm just there like, I want to talk about the dog now.
Do you have a dog?
I've got two Frenchies, two French
Oh,
bulldogs.
nice. Oh,
Uh,
amazing. They're so
yeah,
cool
and
dogs.
they were both they were both rescued in some aspects because they actually belonged to my mum and dad,
Oh.
and the oldest one is Charlie. We call her Charlie. She was rescued. I say not from a charity or anything. One of my dad's friends just happened to be on a breeding farm, and he could not believe what he saw,
Mm.
and he just basically stole. From my knowledge, I could be wrong. He just stole them. He was like, "I'm taking a couple
Wow.
because this is not right." And my dad and my mum one too many of the old beverages, and my dad's friend was like, "Do you want a dog?" And he was like, "Yeah, okay, bring it over." And then the following day, my dad completely forgot about it. Gets a knock on the door, and he answers it, and there was this skin and bone little French bulldog, completely
Oh.
petrified. And my dad just took one look at it and was like, "What the hell is that? What did you bring me?" But now she's such a daddy's girl. Will never
Mm.
leave my dad's side. Always, so lovely. And Pablo is the second one. We only just had him for a few months. He's still a baby, but what happened with him was my mum, my dad, and my little sister. They went on holiday, and they took Charlie to like a dog holiday place,
Mm-hmm.
and this woman who was looking after not just her but a load of dogs in his field, and she befriended this little other French bulldog called Pablo. And when
Mm.
my family came back from this holiday, the woman basically said, here's Charlie back. Would you like to take Pablo?" And they were like, "Why do you want us to take another dog?" And she basically said that the previous owners just said, we don't want him. We do not want him.
Mm.
And my dad was like, "I'm not having that. We'll take him. Give us your
Wow.
info, whatever." And it turned out that in the last 6 to 8 months, not Charlie, Pablo had three owners, 3 to 4
Mm.
owners in
Wow.
the span of 8 months. And my dad was like, he's not going anywhere. He's going to stay with us." And I was like, "Go on, Dad, fight the power."
Mm. So they're real rescues, these
Yeah,
dogs. That's amazing.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And I think it was to do with my dad was making the final decision. My mum was like, "We'll do it," and my dad was like, "No, we will do it. No two questions. We will do
Yeah.
it."
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm so happy to hear that. Yeah, my
I'm.
first two dogs were rescues from shelters. They
Mm,
both came from shelters. One was a kill shelter, so the first one was like a genuine rescue. The other one, they would have kept him forever, but we fell in love with him, and he was great, and we took him all over the country. Traveling as actors, we went all over America with them. They were in every city that I was in. The dogs went to. But now we have a mini Australian. We have Rocky,
mm.
and he's the love of our lives, and he's that dog that's just like he's a daddy's boy. He won't, he's always by my side, except when I'm doing podcast interviews.
It's like I want to come on.
Yeah, he's downstairs being a dog. He's guarding the house.
Oh, that's cool, Les. But coming on to you, I mean, was it always a career path in performing arts? Did you always wanted to be an actor on the stage, TV or film? Is that always the ambition goal?
Pretty much. I mean, I didn't, as a young kid, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and my mother would sort of throw job titles out there, like to try to kind of, well, maybe you want to do this, maybe you want to do that, and one thing she said, well, maybe you would want to be, what did she say? Oh, a travel. Maybe you'd want to be a travel agent, travel the world. And I said, oh, that sounds cool. I had no idea what it was. I was like, oh, maybe a travel agent. And my brother immediately said, he wants to be a stewardess. I was like, yeah, no, not the same thing. So that job didn't stick. I did not actually invest in doing that. But I always loved like the variety shows on TV. Like, I don't know what you have in Wales, but in the US, like we had Sonny and Cher had their own TV show. Dean Martin had their own TV show.
Mm,
Before I was born, well, maybe not before I was born, but Frank Sinatra had his one. And there were variety shows where the people would do everything. They'd come out, they'd talk to the audience, be themselves. Then they would do skits. They would sing. They would always sing, and I thought, this is just so cool. I love that they kind of just get to do all these different things. There was comedy, So that I think that's what kind of made me think, oh, musical theater feels like it's the closest thing I can actually do right now to that. This was back before you could have your own YouTube TV show. So I didn't, the idea of hosting something was impossible, but I could be in a musical and I could play a role and do things like that. So I started dance classes. My mom put me in dance class. I don't know if she just thought I needed the exercise or what, what it was about, but she put me in dance class when I was 4, I think, really young, with my brother, and who did not go into the arts, but he really applied himself to it. But I hated it. I was actually scared of the class, and I cried and was just like hated it, and so we quit. We didn't do it for very long. And then 2 years later, I felt ready for it, and I started studying in Cincinnati with someone named Jack Loizo was his name, and he had studios all over the town. And I went to his studio on the west side of town. There wasn't really much to do if you were interested in the arts, and especially for boys, there were just almost no opportunities. But that was one of the things that I could do, and by then I was ready for it and really liked it. And then shortly after that, I had a cousin who music directed a community theater production of Oliver. And she said, you should come in and audition for The Artful Dodger. I think you'd be really good in that part. And I'd seen the movie. The movie was really big at that time. So we're talking about the 70s, early 70s. And I'd seen the movie, and he wears a top hat and tails in the show, and I thought, that's the coolest thing ever. I want that costume. Yeah, I'll audition for that. That sounds cool, And I got it, and that sort of started me going to different things and wanting to do shows, and it just kind of ran from there. I did a community theater production of The Roar of the Grease Paint, The Smell of the Crowd, which is an Anthony Newley, Leslie Bricusse property. It's very rarely done, but it has a lot of famous songs from it. The song Who Can I Turn To is from that. Who can I turn to when nobody needs me? That's from that show. It was a beautiful song. But it was a Catholic school that was doing the show, and everybody in the show had to be ninth grade or older. And I wasn't Catholic, and I was too young, but I auditioned anyway. And they brought me in and said, yeah, I think we're going to give you this part. And then I guess the diocese or whatever got involved and said, no, we can't have this. He's got to be Catholic and he's got to be the right age and all this. So they kind of kicked me out and made me the assistant director. And then 2 weeks later, after trying to audition, they couldn't find anybody to do it. So then they recast me in the part, and I ended up getting to do it. And it was such a baptism by fire for doing the kind of roles that I sort of ended up doing, roles like the Phantom and roles like the Scarlett Pimpernel, because he never leaves stage. He sings, Anthony Newley wrote it for himself and starred in it in London and in New York. So it's just like a tour de force of this incredible music and this giant role where you're just always on and always doing something. And it kind of, I really got bit by the musical theater bug then, because I got a sense of what a thrill it is to create a character, to bring it to life, not just, through what's in the text, but in the musical life of the character and the musical life of the show. And to have a giant arc like that, to start at one place and end somewhere else and be radically different at the end of the play, to recreate that in the course of 2 hours for an audience night after night. I became a junkie. I mean, that was, I wanted to do that with the rest of my life, and luckily have been able to do that.
Mm. Where did the voice come from? Because I've listened to a lot of the songs that you've performed in Phantom of the Opera, Scarlet Pimpernel, and Aspects of Love. I mean, these are very commanding songs. These are songs that, Andrew Lloyd Webber and all them lot, I think they've just got a vendetta for singers. Like, come on in, let's test the waters. Come on, let's test your vocals. I'd be like, you bastards. But where
That's
did that
true.
powerful voice come from? Was it through years of training, preparation, or was it just something that you had but obviously developed over the years? Do tell.
Yeah. Well, when in school, I mean, I did, get roles in musicals, and I was singing a lot. But I ended up going to a performing arts school in Cincinnati, Ohio. I went to the School for Creative and Performing Arts, SCPA. It's still there, and I'm a big supporter of theirs. I just love the school. But I was surrounded by. I was always more the actor at the school because I was surrounded by some of my best friends still to this day who were really amazing singers, and I was kind of a late bloomer vocally, even though I was getting the parts. I think it was more my storytelling that was getting me the parts as opposed to the actual sound of my voice. But I didn't think about it that much. And I really, initially in college, I wanted to just major in acting. I just thought, well, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to play roles, or do plays, or, maybe do TV film. I don't know. But, and I did take lessons in college, but I never really, on a professional level, I thought I would probably be more like a song and dance man, like a tap dancer kind of guy, like to do, parts like that. Because I did tap dance and I was okay at that, and I thought, well, that's probably the direction I'm going to take, and then I'll do plays or something like that. But I loved musicals and wanted to do them. I just wasn't sure I was in that category. And I got one of my first professional jobs when I moved to New York with, nothing. I had no union affiliations, nothing at all. I just was like, I just want to try to do this. I had training. I had 4 years of actor training. And one of the first gigs I got, it ended up being my Broadway debut, was Fiddler on the Roof, a production of Fiddler on the Roof with Topol, who had played Tevi in the movie. So it was a big deal. It was a big deal production. And it was a tour that was then going to come to Broadway. And I was hired to play Fiedka, the Russian who marries the youngest daughter, Chava. And at that time, when I was hired to do it, I was hired as a replacement. And so the Fiedka that was leaving didn't sing in the show. He only did the book scenes. And if you know the show, there's a solo in the show for a Russian tenor. But it isn't always necessarily done by Fiedka. It's often just done by another singer. And so we had a hiatus in the tour before we went to Japan. We had like a Japan leg of the tour, and then we came to Broadway. And before Japan, they called and they said, we want to audition you to sing this solo. We want to beef up your role a little bit. And I said, sure, that sounds great. And I was like, shit, I got to get some voice lessons. Because I wasn't really sure I could do it. So I had a neighbor who was one of the best voice teachers in town, as it turned out. New York, you're always, an arm's reach from the biggest stars and the biggest directors and everybody. They're all there, trying to make their mark. And my neighbor was a great voice teacher. And I said, can I get a lesson with you? And we did a lesson, and it was the Russian tenor solo it's pretty high. It's like a G, he sings that. But I didn't know if I could do it. It felt like too high for me, and I had to train with her, and we worked and put it together. And they gave it to me. I had the audition, and they gave it to me. And so I suddenly went from having a featured acting role to having really a nicely featured part. I had this great vocal introduction to my character, because that was the first thing I really did in the show. And then I had the book scenes after that. And it became luckily for me, a really nice launch for me professionally. And while we were so we had a couple tour dates before we came to New York and opened the Broadway production. We were in Toronto, and there was a company called Live Entertainment that was launching, and they had their own production of Phantom of the Opera. They had that Colm Wilkinson was doing. And they were getting ready to do another Andrew Lloyd Webber show, Aspects of Love, which they'd done a Broadway production, they'd done London, and they wanted to bring in a new director and redo the whole thing. And apparently, from what I was told, I met two people through Topol while I was in Toronto. I met Norman Jewison, who had directed the film, which of course they were friends, who was just lovely to me. And I met Garth Drabinsky, who had started Live Entertainment. And the way Garth tells it, Garth likes a story, so I don't know if this is actually true, but the way he tells it, he says, the minute I saw you, I knew you were my Alex for Aspects of Love. Now, I still had to jump through the hoops and do 5,000 auditions and all that stuff, but apparently whatever he saw of me doing Fiddler made him think, oh, you could do this. And then, of course, I had to go back to that voice teacher because that was an even harder role to sing. That was real. Like Alex is a bit of a monster. He sings a B flat, which is high as heck for for male singers.
Yeah.
For tenors, it's high for me. It was high for me at the time because here's me thinking I don't have these notes, So I really had to work with her and get it together and figure out how to do this. And again, it was just hard work, yes, but luck. I got it, and that was the beginning of where I really started like kind of taking seriously, oh, I'm at a different level vocally than I ever expected to be. So I really have to kind of start going with that. And the biggest influence for me, honestly, was listening to great singers and faking it till I made it, like until I found my own style of singing, which to me was because I'd always loved rock music. I grew up on the 80s rock, on 70s and 80s rock. So like for me, like Jesus Christ Superstar was what I wanted to do if I could sing it. At that time I couldn't sing it. So what my goal as a singer and still to this day is to combine as much naturalistic, to make the song just another level of communication, and at the same time bring in a slightly poppier, slightly rockier kind of sound to these more legitimate pieces, so that it ultimately feels super accessible to an audience's ear. And maybe if you're lucky as an artist, they stop really thinking about the voice and they start really like leaning into the communication, and like, oh wow, I'm emotionally involved in this song, not just like, oh, that's a cool voice, but wow, this is taking me on a ride emotionally.
Mm. It's funny because every time I hear aspects of love when it comes to the dreaded B flat for a male performer, I always automatically think of the story of musicals. It was a BBC documentary series. It was like 3 episodes of how the British theatre was going to take back the West End because blah blah blah. And Michael Ball was on there, and apparently he said that he said to Andrew Lloyd Webber, "Oh, the song's gotta have it's gotta go up there. It's gotta go up there." And Andrew Lloyd Webber was like, well, that's a B flat. And Michael Ball was like, "Is it? Well, I'll give it a go." And yeah, you're gonna have to thank Michael Ball for that.
Yeah, I got to work with Michael on Woman in White. He came to the States, to another Andrew Lloyd Webber show, which unfortunately was not a hit in the U.S. But we did it we had an okay run. Like we ran by today's stretch, it was long. We ran almost 4 months. But at that time, that was considered a flop. I guess we didn't make it. But working with Michael was amazing because he had been such an inspiration to me. I was up for Marius in the original production, the original Broadway production of Les Mis. So I was, listening to that recording and listening to Michael, and I was so inspired by him. And I got right down to the wire on that. It was like literally like 2 days before they were going into rehearsals. They still hadn't cast Marius, and I was at that last round of guys for it, and I didn't get it. I was so devastated. I thought my career was over. Right before my final audition, I went to Times Square and stood in front of the statue of George M. Cohan that's in Times Square. And I said, please, Lord, please let me get this show. If I've never asked you for anything. and God had no time for my prayers. He just said, nope, not this time. But then later I got to do Andras, which was really cool. So it worked out in the end.
You mentioned Topol, big name. He is, correct me, yeah, 'cause you did say he's the actor who's like the part for Fiddler, the main guy. Oh, kind of like I had a brain fart
for
here, Ron.
Tevye is the role.
Tevye, that's it. Because I said, because I remember once I was in a rehearsal once, and I said, "Oh, the actor Tevye," and someone went, "You mean Topol Reese?" It's like it's okay, it's okay.
Right. It's very easy to confuse the two of them.
Well, because
Very easy.
I mean, Topol is Tevye. Yeah, at the end of
Yeah.
the day, I mean,
Yeah.
you could say like your Brenner is the king and King and I.
Yeah.
But what was it like to be around him when doing Fiddler on the Roof?
Intimidating when I first joined because he was a movie star. Um, and I, again, joining a company as opposed to coming in at the beginning of rehearsals, you're always a little bit on the back foot because you want people to be able to keep their show the way they love it, but you also want to begin to interject your version of things and your new life into it. So you're doing this funny dance between trying to make people happy and not ask them to change what they're doing, but also trying to breathe new life into it. So I was kind of terrified of him in particular, and he could be tough, like a lot of the actors. Um, we had gone through several Goldas because they did not, he couldn't get along with these Goldas. Whose fault that was, I leave that to your imagination. It could have been different for each situation, but it could be challenging. So I came in feeling like, I just want to stay out of this guy's way and whatever. I remember in the first rehearsal that I had with him, there's this scene in the show, the first time that I actually meet Tevye, that my character Fiedka actually meets Tevye. And there's this big divide between the Catholics and the Jewish people in the town. There's friction, there's been destruction, there've been pogroms and in the second act, my character goes to him and extends a hand to him and says, good afternoon, and to shake hands. And he looks down, he looks at his hand. I don't know if your cameras can see that, but it's like if one person has a hand, and instead of taking his hand like you would take a person's hand, he just takes his finger and shakes his hand. And it was the first time we had done it. It was my dress rehearsal with him, and it's first time meeting him and everything. I'm in costume and they're not, and all of this. And I go, "Good day, sir." And he looks at my hand and he goes, "Not right. That's not right." And I was like, "Oh, uh-oh, now I'm in trouble. What's going on?" And what he was commenting about was I had my gloves on because it's winter and we have all these coats and stuff. And I didn't know I wasn't supposed to have my gloves on. So I'm there with the gloves and I'm thinking, what's wrong? What's wrong? And suddenly, the assistant director rushes on stage and goes, "Take your gloves off." I'm like, "Oh, sorry." And then she goes, "Yes, it's good. It's good. And then he warmed to me after that. And actually, by the end of the run, he had done a series of portraits. He loved to draw. And he'd done a series of portraits of everybody in the show. And he did a portrait of me in the character, which I just will never forget. I think he gave it to me. I don't have it anymore, but I do have a photograph of him that was photographed, I think, for the New York Times, where he was showing them off, and my photos on the wall, and I'm just like, that's so cool that happened. That this guy, this legend, international legend, took a few minutes to consider how to make my likeness appear on a piece of paper. That was cool. So it ended up being a really good thing with him, and I learned a lot from him as an actor because even though we're playing these giant places, he made the audience come to him. His performance, it still had a very small scale, and because of microphones, it was possible to have that scale. And he still just destroyed the place, with the power of what he did. But he would start so small. He'd walk out on stage, he'd look up at the fiddler, and he'd say, "A fiddler on the roof. Sounds crazy, no?" Just like that, tiny, tiny. But it was so compelling, So I learned a lot from him.
All I just want to do now is, if I was a rich man. Da, 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 da.
Can you imagine, though? He did that show, and he did it again and again and again after that particular production. And he'd already done it thousands and thousands of times. I don't know how many performances he ended up doing in his lifetime. I mean, the blessing and the curse of that great, inheriting that great role and doing it all those times. And my wife, Sandra Joseph, was Christine on Broadway for 10 years. She's the longest running Christine. And, we often talk about, I never approached anything like that. I did Book of Mormon for 7 years, which is a long time, but I had breaks and things in and out of that. But to do a role like Tevye for more than 20 some years of your life, it's, I don't want to say blessing and curse. I'd rather say curse and blessing,
Mm,
but a huge thing to take on. But it's what we do. It's part of the hardest
yeah.
job of to being a theater actor is to breathe life night after night for that audience that's never seen what you've done 1,000 times.
Oh yeah. I sometimes call it the Bela Lugosi effect, because Bela Lugosi is going to be remembered for Dracula, and he's done Dracula so many times in film, but he also did it many times on the stage, and so much so that another documentary, the BBC documentary that they did was the History of Horror with Mark
Mm,
Gatiss, and he said that he was buried in his Dracula cape
mm,
and
mm.
costume, and it's
Wow.
like it can be a type of curse where you're just going to be known for the one role, despite the fact that it's like, despite the fact that Yul Brynner, Topol, Bela Lugosi, a lot of these prominent, well-respected actors are just going to be known for that one role.
Yeah.
And yeah, we can always say, like, any actor who plays James Bond, or any actor that plays the Doctor in Doctor Who, you're just typecast. But it's like, come on, look beyond that. They are
Yeah.
actors, and they've done more than one role, you know.
Yeah. But it's no, it's a very real thing, and it's. I remember when I was cast as the Phantom, because the Phantom has been a bit like that for me, where it's the role that you'll just never get rid of,
Mm,
for better or for worse, or for worse or for better. Um, it stays with you. When I was cast, I'm friends with Brad Little, who had done the role many, many times in the U.S. and has gone on to do it internationally, quite a bit. He was doing it throughout Asia for a long, long time. And when I was very first cast, we kind of, were kind of commiserating about it and talking about it. And he said to me at that time, he said, "Well, once the Phantom, always the Phantom." And I didn't really get it. I didn't really understand what he meant, but still now in my life, all these years later, my wife and I were still performing those songs. We're still doing it. And I've even at this point embraced wearing the mask when I perform that stuff, which I never used to do. I was like, nope, never. I'm never gonna do that. Never gonna do that. Never gonna wear the mask. And at the end of the day, it's such an honor to have gotten to be even a tiny part. I mean, God knows I'm nowhere near the first Phantom or even the 100th, but if I was the 100th, that's still a relatively small, it's like being an astronaut. There's so few people that know what it's like to wear that mask. And
mm.
I'm one of those people. And that's a huge honor. And it does give you a platform to continue to do other things. I don't think I would have ever gotten to do the Scarlett Pimpernel if I hadn't done Phantom first. It became the thing that let people know they didn't have to worry about me. Like I could get cast, I could get offers without auditioning. Things would just go, oh, he was the Phantom, he'll be fine, and they just would assume everything's cool,
Yeah.
because it's like you're vetted. And that's a huge honor. Aside, that is a thing that happened to Ron Bohmer, but then there's the other side of it of the honor of bringing those kinds of stories to life every night. I mean, that role is everything, man. He's a murderer. He's an abandoned child. He is a genius.
A
He's a
tormented soul.
composer. Say again?
A tormented soul, would you
A
say?
tormented soul, without question. Without question. He's a giant egomaniac. Um, and he's also capable of the tenderest, most vulnerable love that he doesn't understand and doesn't know what to do with. It's just a phenomenal part.
Mm.
So to be trusted with that, and I think it has to, for the Andrew Lloyd Webber particularly, it has to begin with a voice. They have to feel that this is a voice that will compel an audience. So that's a huge honor, of course. But then beyond that, this canvas of what that part can be. And I've seen many actors do it so differently. I think Colm Wilkinson was my favorite. I really loved his interpretation of it. But I've seen so many great Phantoms. Seen many of them because my wife played opposite so many of
Yeah.
them. And and I just stole everything I could from all of them because they're so good. It's like, I'm doing
Yeah.
that. That's great. So yeah, I've come to embrace the honor of that, as I think, as Topol, had to struggle with here. I'm doing this for my 50,000th time. But I think he also embraced what an incredible honor it is to bring something like that to life. I mean, that play, that is a great frickin' play.
Oh yeah.
That story of this guy who comes out and says, "We celebrate tradition," da, 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 and then we literally watch everything taken away from them until they just have to go off to America. And that's real. That's what happens in life. That's what we see it everywhere in the struggles that immigrants have today. And, it's captivating and devastating and also beautiful and heartbreaking. And
Yeah.
to bring that to life is an honor.
So you have a business that is looking to set off and reach for the stars. You have a goal or have targets, but you do not know where to start or where to go. You want to transform your business, have a structure, or even have assistants. Then guys, look no further than Olive & Palm. Olive & Palm are a business consultancy firm that specialize in transforming your company into becoming the best it can be. With expertise in digital and agile transformations, they will bring cutting-edge strategies, innovative solutions, and first-person approach to make sure your vision comes to life or get to the next step. Olive & Palm have worked with names such as EasyJet, British Airways, Boots, American Express, Specsavers, Sports Direct, John Lewis, and so much more. So why pick Olive & Palm? Because not only do they have years of expertise and big names behind them, but they are passionate and they do care. They are determined to help you reach your goals. So if you want to get in contact with them, dial on their number at 07555 00041, or you can even email them at molly@palm-olive.com. Again, their phone number is 07555 00041. And again, their email is molly@palm-olive.com.
When it comes to Phantom of the Opera, and you said it's an honor and everything, but did you ever felt at times that you were intimidated by the role itself, by the musical? Because I've heard a lot of performers, they say, "Oh, there's because it's such a, like, playing the Phantom, it's such a big role." Did you ever feel intimidated by that whenever you went on stage?
I did when I was hired for it, because I didn't understand it when I was cast. There are there are so many interpretations of this material, and I don't know that any one of them gets it spot on, in terms of bringing you what you need. If you're looking at it and going, okay, I'm going to play this role, I'm going to bring it to life, and I think the Weber version leaves you the most leeway, in terms of like who is this? What is he? What's going on with this guy? And they give you little pieces of his history, but it's been interpreted and reinterpreted so many times. And the thing that took me from the intimidation of it, there's the pressure of carrying a show, which my daughter is going through right now. She's playing Glinda in the national tour of Wicked, Austin Bohmer, and she's phenomenal. And so I'm just like so stupid proud of her as a dad. She's crazy, not just as a as a person, she's amazing, but as an actor and a singer in this role, she's really making a unique mark on it. And she's feeling that pressure, of what it is to carry a show. And I'm, happy to say I think she's handling it just remarkably. But it's a lot. The two girls in Wicked, the two witches, they carry a giant responsibility. Playing the Phantom is a giant responsibility. There's all this history that comes with it too. Before you walk in the door, there's all this, oh, here it comes. It's the thing we've all read about and heard about. Um, and yeah, I think I felt some of that when I started, when I was cast before I started rehearsals. But you know, two things saved me. One, I have a really giant ego, and it. I think even more then than I do today. I was like, I could do it. I could do anything. Just like my psyche is telling me I could do this. This would be great. Whatever. Even though I really didn't know what the hell I was going to do. And that was the part that, I was losing sleep over. It was like,
Yeah.
yeah, but what, who is this guy? What's going on? What's going on? So I read the novel. I always try to do as much, source material research as I can with any role. Like go back to where it came from first. Sure, you can watch the Lon Chaney movie or any number of different films, which are fascinating, but how did it start? What was the initial idea of this character? And what really, really helped me as you read the novel, um, there's a character that's not actually in the Weber versions, maybe not in any of the versions. They just call him the Persian, and the Persian is someone who knew the Phantom as a child and as a growing up, and he has history with this person who has come to Paris and taken over the opera house and done all these things. And the first thing he does, the novel does a wonderful job of like keeping the mystery, as does I think the musical, of like, is he a ghost? Is he a person? Is he real? Is he some kind of monster? What is this guy? What is he? And you're left with all these questions. And the Persian in the novel, he comes through and he takes them through the opera house and he says, I'm going to show you, we're going to find the way he did all these things, the way he disappeared. Here it is. Come down to this place. This is a lever that he pushed, and this is the thing, and the mirror went up, and all of this, and shows you the mechanics of how he creates his illusions. And that was so helpful to me because I went, oh, he's a dude. He's not a ghost. He's a guy. He's a genius who has committed his life to finding, how do I find power? If I'm a child who's been abandoned and left, how do I find some power in this world? And the way he ultimately finds it is by convincing people that he is, in fact, a ghost. And he rigs the opera house to do all these different tricks and all these different things. And along the line of doing all that, he reaches the power that allows him to become the artist that he always wants to be, to force them to do an opera, to make them pay him a salary. By fear, he's controlling everybody there. And most important, it gives him the means to connect to Christine, which becomes literally the most important thing in his life, the life-saving thing for him, life or death. Winning Christine becomes the world of it. And in some ways, that made him one of the easiest characters I've ever played, because what does he want? He wants Christine. Yeah. Sure, he wants him to do his opera, but why? Because Christine's going to be the star. Sure, he wants the salary and all the things that, they're doing all this, but why? Because he can put on this mask and this costume and this armor to convince this woman that he is captivated by, that he is worthy of her love. And that in itself is such a fascinating thing to play, because he's hiding everything about his real self. Because if he knows in his mind, he's certain that if she sees him as what he truly is, she will flee and run away. And
I think it's
the very
sorry, I think it's really interesting because it's always good to know that the Phantom, like you said, he's only just a guy who's a genius of being calculating, manipulating the people of the theater to get his own way, in which he becomes an enigma. But there's always a price of becoming an enigma. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you've got all this, but you can't have this. And that's the
Right.
price you're willing, that's the price you got to win to pay. And that's sort of a way comes his downfall. It's like, because you've got this facade around
Yeah.
him, and then he breaks it to go, I want Christine and everything. It's like, well, you just shown, you screwed it for yourself. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's very true. And I think it's for me in, in the overview of the piece, it was really important for me to remember. I needed the audience to believe that he was the bloodthirsty man that murdered, two or three people through the course of the show, as much as he is the man who is seductive and is, as Hal Prince used to say, Svengali-like, and the look that he has. He's modeled himself after Rudolph Valentino. He's tried to have this look of absolute perfection. And of course, we know underneath it, that's not at all what he is. His face is, can be terrifying until you're used to it. And even his posture isn't that. He's not, everything he shows her is practiced and polished and pulled together. He's created this whole thing. And, it works. Like Music of the Night was such a great scene because everything's working. She passes out and faints, and in his arms, and he is supposed to put her on the boat and all of those things to sleep. But it's a success for this illusion that he's created. He's won her heart. And the next morning she wakes up, he's composing. She thinks the mask has to be romance. It has to be for romance. Couldn't possibly for anything else because everything else has been so romantic. And she sneaks up thinking, I'll remove it and see the most beautiful man I've ever seen in her life. And what does she see? It doesn't even matter much what she sees. It's what happens to him when he loses his armor, which is he becomes what Hal Prince used to call it, a mewling, puking infant. He's reduced to that little unlovable lump and in front of her. And she's the first person who ever shows him compassion. She gives him the mask back, not because she wants him to cover himself, but because she sees he needs it. And that is, these are the little things that people think they love the show because Masquerade and blah, blah, blah. I don't think so. I think they love it because of these little moments of like human understanding. And the same at the end of the play when she, in his rage and in the way that everything's going to fall apart, when he's exposed and he's got nowhere to go. And she says, pitiful creature of darkness, what kind of life have you known? Give me the courage to show you you're not alone. And she kisses him. She shows him real, genuine love, which he does not know what to do with. What's amazing about this character is there's no happy ending for the Phantom. It's not going to happen. He's a murderer. It's not going to happen. He's not capable of living in society. Even the way he's doing it is there's a fuse on it. It's going to blow up, and it does. It ends up blowing up. But the beauty of it is this destroyed soul gets a moment of actually feeling what genuine human people get to feel all the time that he's never felt because his own mother, what is this face that earned, I used to do it up the octave, I would sing, this face which earned a mother's fear and loathing, a mask, my first unfeeling scrap of clothing. That's who he thinks he is. And then she says, you're not that. You're more than that. And, it's not going to work out for him. He's going to have to disappear. He's going to have to move on to a mysterious other life. But the arc of that, to get to play the arc of that is remarkable. And that became accessible. That became, I'm not thinking about Phantom, the giant thing, the show, the this or that. I'm just telling this story of this character. And that was juicy. That was something I looked forward to doing every single night.
This is why I love doing this podcast. I get to learn so much about everything. I was like, really just learning about the Phantom then. I was like, oh my God. Whew. Fair play.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
okay.
cool. It's cool stuff. It's
Yeah.
cool stuff. And it's all there. It's all in it.
Mm,
But the fun thing is we can just enjoy it as a passion play or as a costume drama too. But
yeah.
if you want to go deep, it's actually there.
Do you know when you you said somewhere that everyone performs differently, and you know different versions and that it's just it was really mind-boggling to say because a couple of days ago, me and my fiance we were in the car and she's ironically she teaches every Thursday for this little drama class for kids and they're doing themes on around Wicked, right? And she's in the car and
Cool.
she's a great singer. She always says to me, Reese, you're more of a character singer. I'm the singer. And I was like, okay, okay, that's fine. No worries. But we're
But
in the
still a
car
singer.
and what's that?
But still a singer.
Yeah, still a singer. I was like, still a singer. And she was like,
Yes.
I'm trying to bring it down. But anyway, she was in the car and she said, I've got to teach these kids to sing Defying Gravity.
Hmm.
And she said, it's so hard at the end to do the and I'm like, and she was copying Cynthia. I keep saying Erivo. I know it's not, but Cynthia Erivo. She keeps copying her. I'm like, why are you copying her?
Hmm.
And she was like, well, you know, that's how it is. It's like, no, it's not. It's like Stephen Schwartz didn't write that. He wrote, this is the note.
Yeah.
Go and do it that way. Go and
Yeah.
do it in your own interpretation. And I felt so sorry for her because I went on this little rant going, look, Adina Menzel did it that way, and Cynthia did it that way, and everyone did it different ways. And I remember saying, I was like, look at every single Phantom of the Opera. Do you honestly think that each and every single actor did it the same way, same time? No, because the Phantom of the Opera wouldn't last long.
Yeah.
And she was there like, you okay? And I went, yeah. And I went back just admiring it, admiring the views in the car, like, yeah, yeah, you just carry on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that moment about, the alphabet at the end of Wicked with that, and I do think a lot of singers, young singers, when they're approaching that material, it freaks them out a little bit because it's hard. It is a challenging sing. But hard things are not impossible things. They're just the things we have to find the roadmap to.
Hmm.
And, I've often heard singers working on that and they've hit notes that are higher. They've already gone, just you and I defying gravity. They've gone above the it's it's the same note, but they've already done it, but because it's at the end and it's iconic and it's all these things, like we hang all this stuff on it that makes it harder. And at the end of the day, like I always try to, when I'm coaching young actors, I try to say, for something like that, it's just her victory cry at the end of it. It's like I've already done all the hardest stuff by telling you what I'm going to do with my life, that I'm now going to, it's time for me to close my eyes and lead, or whatever the lyric is there. I've laid out all of it and it's done. I've done all of it. And at the end of it, I just go, hell yeah. That's kind of what that is at the end of it. It's that, and it's gonna happen, and that releases some of that stigma of like, now I have to hit the highest note in the song or any of those kinds of things, and lets them kind of make it their own thing. It's almost it's Tarzan, what he would do when he would swing on the vines. I
Yeah.
mean, yes, it's a call to let the apes know you're coming to rally them, but it's also just like, man, isn't it amazing to swing on vines through the jungle with only a loincloth on? And that's kind of what she does at that moment. It's a victory cry,
Yeah.
of like, I'm going to stand in my power. So it should have a release to it. It should have a freedom. More than good notes, it should just sound like, yeah. you know?
When it comes to obviously Phantom of the Opera, Les Miserables, Aspects of Love, Sunset Boulevard,
Hmm.
Scarlett Pimpernel, has
Yeah.
there ever what was the one musical that stands out to you that has been somewhat quote unquote difficult in terms of preparation and singing, where you are challenged to sing this song this way and everything? Do you see where I'm coming from? What's been the most
I do.
musical is what I'm getting at.
Vocally, oh gosh. Vocally, the biggest challenge, and I only did it once, I did it for a concert version that Tim Rice was involved in. But I did Judas in Superstar,
Hmm.
and that was the hardest vocally. Um, I honestly think I could sing it better today than I did then. That was like 15 years ago now, that I did it. But because I'm still training, and I still have a great teacher who's really helped me find an easier way to sing high and all of those kinds of things. And if for any singers or actors or anybody that is listening to your podcast, just don't stop training, because you evolve constantly. You're constantly evolving, and you need to find new ways to do things, and that's what I've been working to do. But Judas was written, we began our conversation. I don't know if it'll make it onto the podcast, but you and I began the conversation talking about sometimes it seems like Andrew Lloyd Webber and Alain Bobile, the guys that wrote Les Mis, like they're just writing to torture singers because they write such really hard stuff. But that role I felt like was the most sort of merciless in terms of how high it goes. And I always thought of myself as a baritone and less as a tenor, and yet I loved these things. So I was like, I just want to dream this into reality. I know that sounds crazy, but it's like, if they ask me to do it, I'm not going to say no. I felt like that about all of them, about Phantom, about Pimpernel. You'd watch them from the outside and you would go, these are really hard. But if they ask me, I'm not going to say no. I'm going to figure it out, And I think Judas was the hardest to figure out because it's just relentless, It begins with those wailing A's. Jesus! Like even now, it's hard for me to figure out exactly how to sing that.
Yeah. It's literally saying Jesus,
really
like,
go back under.
To...
Exactly.
Oh God.
I'd have to go back under the hood and really work on that one and really like find the, because one of the tricks of what we do is it's not just being able to like figure out how to sing Heaven on Their Minds, which is an opening song. It's how to figure out how to do it 8 times a week and the rest of the show. These are monsters. So you have to find this combination of a healthy vocal approach to the entire production so that you can get from A to Z and do everything, but also render an emotional and moving, character. And it's super, super challenging. But I'm a big believer in get help with this stuff. Like if you're working on a role that you go, man, this is too, I don't know how I'm going to get that. Get help. Work with some professionals who will say, yeah, well, here's a way to approach that with more ease. On Book of Mormon, they bring in, I'm blanking on her last name right now, but they bring in a professional vocal coach for both Cunningham and Price that works with them before they do the role and works with them during the role to keep them in a place of ease because these roles are so demanding vocally. And they require not just hitting the notes, but hitting the notes in a way that they're not as costly, so that you can hit the next one and the next one, and then you can show up for the next show and you can show up for the next show. Some of these roles, to be completely honest, you give up your life. When I was playing the Phantom, I didn't have much of a life. I was doing the show. My daughter doing Glenda right now, she does vocal rest several days a week to maintain the vocal health to do this. And that's challenging as a professional because like she's got auditions, she had a major audition just last week for something that required major use of her voice. And, that's the gig, unfortunately, of what we do, professionally, that you have to keep it going. But getting professional help is the best approach that I can say about that, I think because the trajectory of my career, because aspects of love was so hard, it was a while before I hit anything that was that hard again, that where I was singing notes that were that high and all of that. So Phantom, I don't want to say that Phantom was easy because it certainly was not. Phantom is harder as a role than it is as a sing. To just sing Phantom, we would do sitz probes with the orchestra in every city that we would play, which was amazing because you would have a full orchestra and you would just stand and sing the score, and I loved doing that. And that was so cool. Literally sitting there and watching it all be handmade by human beings at the time, bringing this score to life. But that was easier than doing the show, because the show, you've got the makeup, you've got you've got all the screaming and shouting that the Phantom has to do too. That takes a toll. But vocally, I didn't feel when I came into it like it was going to eat me alive. The role almost ate me alive, but the vocal part of it did not. But Jesus Christ Superstar can eat you alive. That's a tough one.
You mentioned Book of Mormon. Did you ever get to meet Matt Stone and Trey Parker?
I didn't, and I feel so bummed that I never got to work with them on it, because it was a replacement situation. I was up for the national tour, for the role that I ended up getting to play, and I could not go to the final callbacks because I was doing a production of Sunday in the Park with George. I was playing George, and that was, to me, that was the brass ring, that role. Like, if there was anything in my life that was like, if I don't do this before I die, I'm never going to be able to live with myself or forgive myself. And that George in Sunday in the Park with George was that role for me. When I came to New York, with, I think I had like $2,000 that disappeared in about 3 months. So I had no money, no contacts, no nothing. But Sunday in the Park with George was running, and standing room was $10. It was, it was almost cheaper than a movie at that time. So I just saw it over and over, and I fell in love with that show. So I desperately wanted to do that show, and finally did get the chance to play that role, in a really incredible production that was really faithful to the original, and the original set design and all of that. And then in the midst of that, as happens in theater, comes this opportunity to audition for the national tour of Book of Mormon. And I just decided I can't right now, because I think it'll cost me too much on this other thing that I'm doing. So I didn't do it and didn't end up getting the part. But then it opened up a year later, and that's how I got to get into the role. But at that point, unfortunately, Matt and Trey were not involved in it anymore. So I got to work with Casey Nicklaw extensively, which was super cool, because I'm such a fan of his, and he's just an incredible director. He's a really great, he's an amazing choreographer, but he's a great actor's director. Like, he will tell you that one thing, think about this, and that opens up a scene for you. And I wasn't expecting that. I did not expect that he would be able to really help me craft a role as opposed to a performance, So I was really grateful to him for that. But yes, sadly, I did not get to work with the South Park boys, although we did get to tour the South Park studios when we were in LA with the show, when we were playing the Pantages. And that was super cool. They were not there. And I got to do a guest role, a vocal role on the video game. I forget which one it's called, but that day they said, listen, you're here. Do you want to do the part of this guy in this old folks home? And it's like, hell yes, I want to do that. So I'm on that video game, I can't remember what it's called. They're in superhero costumes for it, is all I know. But that was really, really cool. Yeah. Not as cool as getting to meet them, but pretty cool.
Did you ever get to meet, hearing all the music, the likes of Stephen Sondheim or Andrew Lloyd Webber, Tim Rice, or Hal Prince? Because obviously you mentioned Phantom of the Opera, and obviously Hal Prince, he's directed Phantom, and obviously Andrew Lloyd Webber, done the music and everything. Did you ever meet any of these giant names in theater during your career?
You blipped out for a second, so I'm going to ask you to re-ask that question just so I
No,
make
that's
sure.
fine.
I
Because
got
I
most
noticed
of
that.
it, but I want to
Yeah,
make sure I'm answering the right question.
no, it's fine. Because I noticed I froze. Then I was like, ah, crap. But, basically, yeah. Did you ever get to meet the giants of theatre, including the likes of Andrew Lloyd Webber, Stephen Sondheim, Cameron McIntosh, Tim Rice, and Hal Prince? Those names that in your career.
Yeah. Um, I think I think Andrew was the I actually met Sondheim first, but I never really got to work with Sondheim, even though I got to meet him. I used to be in a parody show in New York City called Forbidden Broadway. And if you don't know it, listen to those albums. They're hysterical. And they're all the Broadway songs that you love, but with parody lyrics about the production or the show or about Broadway or whatever. And they're just funny as hell. Gerard Alessandrini is a genius. Um, I was playing Sondheim. Sunday in the Park was running, and I was playing Sondheim. We did a Sunday in the Park parody where I was George, and then George takes off the beard and he's Sondheim, and he sings "Send in the Crowds," which is a lament about how everybody, the New York Times loves his shows, but people don't come. His shows don't sell tickets, which is sort of funny now because nowadays, since Sondheim's passing, everyone is, his shows are the crown jewels of everybody's season. They want to do his shows as they always, should have been. But it was funny him lamenting, don't you like art? My fault, I fear. I thought that you'd want what I want. Sorry, my dear. And then they ended something like, "Thank you, Frank Rich, for this great review," or what. Yeah, I'm paraphrasing. They're not making them as brilliant as he did. But so I was playing Sondheim in that, and he came to the show. I met him afterwards, and he was just really kind of quiet and just like, "Good job." Um, but then again, after that, there was a production of Follies that was being cast for London. It was like just weeks after this, and I got called in to play, to audition to play young uh, Ben, I think it was, one of the two guys. Um, and I will never forget it because at the audition, um, Sondheim, it was in a theater. It was in the Martin Beck Theater. I think it's still called the Martin Beck. I think it's where Moulin Rouge is playing now. Maybe they. Oh, it's the Hirsch. I think they call it the Hirschfeld now. Um, and so I go onto the stage to audition, and Sondheim walks from the back of the theater and comes and sits in the third row, right close. There's nobody. Everybody else is back, like about 6 rows or whatever. And Sondheim just came and, like, for whatever reason, and maybe he remembered me from doing that, or I don't know what, but he just wanted to watch closer, you know. And it kind of freaked me out. Yeah, but I was like, oh my God, Stephen Sondheim's in the front row. So yeah, and then I didn't get the part, but it was just so cool that in that moment I was just like, one of these giants is here, you know. Um, and then it wasn't long after that that I got Fiddler, and so I got to work with Jerome Robbins on that. And I actually tell this story, and my wife and I do keynote speeches, and I tell the story about how I was almost fired from Fiddler on the Roof. So Jerome Robbins came in to work with us for 3 weeks before we opened on Broadway, and prior to that opening, it was everything had been directed by Ruth Mitchell, who was Hal Prince's assistant. And Ruth became a champion of mine, which is how I think maybe how I finally ended up in Phantom of the Opera and being on Hal's radar. But so Robbins came in, and we were working on To Life, which is where the Russian tenor solo that I referenced earlier in our interview it happens. And we're in rehearsal, and I stand on top of the table. Zava Shostarovia, heaven bless you both, Nostrovia. And Robbins goes, "Stop! No, that's not right. You have to be more welcoming." And he does his arm like this. And I was like, "Oh, okay, more welcoming." And I'm like, as an actor, I'm like going, how do I be more how do I make this emotionally more welcoming? So I do it again. And he goes, no, no, stop. You've got to be more welcoming. And he does his arm like that again. And I'm not registering the arm at all. I'm going, I'm not selling it enough. I'm not selling enough. And it happened a third time, and he goes, no, I will have you out of the show. You have got to be more welcoming. I'm like, oh my God, he's having a meltdown. And he was notorious for this, like for berating actors. And thank God the dance captain was my friend Newton Cole, and Cole came over and he said, just move your arm like this when you sing it. It's like, oh, thank you. I did it again. Oh, heaven bless you, and did the arm. And then he crossed his arms and smiling at me. And from then on, we were golden. But I was like, I almost lost my job today because I didn't move my arm the way he wanted me to. So, and then the next day we had scene work with him, and that was amazing. Like, he was great and so cool in that. And then next came Andrew Lloyd Webber. I got to meet Andrew on Aspects of Love. And it was crazy with that because we were up in Canada working on it, but our music director, Mike Reed was his name, he was working on Michael Crawford's first album. So Michael Crawford came to Canada. I think we were in Edmonton, of all places. And that's where we did the sort of pre-tryout. That was our, Des Moines for of Aspects of Love in Toronto, and we were Edmonton, and so Michael Crawford's around, and Andrew Lloyd Webber's around. They're all just around, doing this stuff, and Andrew. I don't know if he's still like this, but at the time he would talk in these non-linear sentences, so it would be hard to have a conversation with him because his brain is so fast. He'd be talking about something and something else would catch his attention. He would change the conversation immediately, and I'd be like, wait, are we still talking about the same thing? It just would go on to, some other thing suddenly. But he was so great. And the time I got to work the closest with him was on Woman in White, because he wanted to make some changes to the piece that I was singing. So we got to really kind of collaborate on that, which was fascinating. He was so kind and just amazing. And I'll tell you one fascinating story about him is that he loved to take over the soundboard sometimes. And he would in the show, and he would do that at the end of Woman in White. He came in. You never know when he'd show up, and then he would come in, and all of a sudden the sound would just go to 11. Everything got super, super loud, and you're like, what is going on? And then we'd come off stage, and he had an ante room right by my dressing room, and I saw him, and I said, were you doing the sound tonight? He said, guilty. Yes, I might have turned it up a bit too loud tonight. But he loved to do it, and you're like, well, I guess you own everything around here. We better let you mix the sound. So I did get to work with him. Tim Rice, who was a hysterical and wonderful and funny man, got to work with him. And what's amazing to me is like that these are people who have become iconic sort of legends in the theater, and how fortunate you are to get to be one of the people to just bring their work to life. And even throw in an idea here and there, with like working with Andrew on Woman in White, I was able to suggest to him that, in the emotional life of the character, I feel like this particular phrase might, if we did a retard here, this might be a little better. And he was like, oh, I love that. That's wonderful. So that was a gift, real gift.
Last question for you now, Ron, and thank you so much for taking the time to share.
I'm sorry I've gone on so long.
Oh no, do you know what? It doesn't matter because I loved every single minute of it. Absolutely enjoyed it.
Thanks. I've got a lot of hot air.
But I always ask this question to all my guests, and I'm going to ask you this: how do you look back on your career?
Yeah, well, it's a tough question. I was listening to your interview with Cuccioli, and he struggled with this too, as I do. Questions like this are always hard for me. Like when people say, if you were on a desert island and you only could take one record, what would it be? And it's like, I can't answer that, but I will attempt to frame it in some way. I think I think what I have been trying to do all this time as a singer, as a songwriter, as an actor especially, and now as a teacher and as a coach and as a speaker, I do this in my work. I think it's always been about authenticity. I think I have been trying to find the real Ron and put as much of the real Ron in everything that I do that I can. I've always said I want an audience to have the experience of leaning forward, in anything that I'm doing or whatever, and going, oh man, I know what that feels like. I recognize that. I relate to that. And I've always felt the key to that was authenticity, was to just, musical theater by its nature, one might call it a false medium, that people don't sing in real life, when they express their emotions, or they don't monologue in that way. And yet they do. I mean, you ask me questions and I monologue for 10 minutes, and that people do it all the time. Donald Trump will monologue till the cows come home about whatever, all of his rallies are just those. So it is somewhat something that does happen in life. And yet, with all the layers of artifice, the things that have captivated me the most in the theater as an audience member are when you become deeply emotionally involved and moved in the show. Les Miserables is a show that successfully does that on so many levels. And so for me, I feel like it's always been about getting to the truth of human behavior. And it's still what I work on. I'm directing a production of The Outsiders right now with some young kids. They're 14 to 17. And all I want them to experience is really talking to each other and really being open and vulnerable to each other in that scenario. And that, I think everything I've done, I've tried to do that. I mean, if you go back and listen to a recording of mine, if you listen to My Love Changes Everything or any of those things, I was really trying to render how broken Alex is when he sings this. In our production, it begins with a funeral, and he's just broken. He doesn't know where to go. And that requires really trusting yourself to just go deep and tell the truth, And so I think if I look back on all of it and even where I'm headed now, whether it's me doing it on a stage or whether it's me coaching another actor or whether it's me giving a keynote to people to say, what can I learn from your career? I would say, drop the mask, learn to trust that you are enough, and that's beautiful, and revel in your own beauty in that regard and share it with the world. That's the most unique thing that you have to offer the world, is your genuine self.
Thank you guys for tuning in to the Creative Space Podcast channel. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you can be notified for more content in the future. Thank you once again.